What's up everyone, this is Zflex and welcome back to another A Producer's Approach video. In this video we're going to be looking at Anki and October Child's song, All or Nothing featuring Neavv. So if you guys haven't seen these videos in the past, the basic structure is there's an intro section with my personal backstory. Then after that we go into a breakdown section where I kind of give my analysis and opinions, and then lastly there's an outro section where I basically just sum up my opinions and thoughts on the song. So let's get into the intro section. So basically this is a collab between Anki and October Child, and some of my personal backstory with this song. I actually know October Child from way back in the day when I used to do A&R for this label before called Base One Music. I kind of met October Child through there because we were kind of doing some behind the scenes administrative stuff, I guess, helping out the owner of Base One Music kind of just for fun, and just because, you know, that was something we all were kind of passionate about at the time. But basically I got into listening to October Child's music back in 2016 when I was helping out Base One, and I think around that time or maybe a year later I was talking with October Child and he told me that he was collaborating on a song with Anki, and they did not have a title for it yet, and it ended up being All or Nothing, which was pretty crazy because he actually told me he was collaborating on a song with Anki, and for me, I was a huge fan of Anki because the Circadian EP or album that Anki had, he just released it maybe within that year or a little bit before I heard the preview of All or Nothing. So I mean, I was a big fan of Anki, and you know, Anki has his unique style as well as October Child. But when I heard that October Child was doing a collab with Anki, I was so ecstatic. Like, I think I kept bothering October Child saying, hey man, can I listen to this song that you're working on with Anki? And I think after maybe a few times of asking October Child, he's like, oh yeah man, I'll let you have a preview. We haven't released the song yet because Anki has a vocalist on the song that he's trying to figure out the logistics for maybe a label release, or you know, the logistics between, you know, getting the vocalist signed to a label and all the logistics behind that. So basically October Child was like, yeah man, here's the private link, and you know, let me know what you think. And basically All or Nothing back then was pretty much finished. They were just looking for, you know, a place to release the song and for the vocalists to get their rights and stuff figured out. But I remember listening to this song like for the first time, and it blew me away. Like, I knew like he and Anki just made like a amazing song, like a banger. And I listened to the song at least like 20 times before the song even came out, and I knew back then that the song was going to be as good as it was, because now, I mean, look at it, the song has 2 million views. Like, I figured the song would, just because of the flow and the feel of the song. So with the backstory of the song, it's just really cool because that's probably the first time ever in my life that I felt like an exclusive artist listening to like unreleased content that I knew was going to be really huge. Like when I first heard All or Nothing, like I knew it was going to be a big song, but you know, a year before it's released, you know, I can't share the song with anyone. It's just me listening to it myself. So it was just me, you know, having an exclusive preview to a song. And I don't know, you know how people feel, you know, when they're kind of exclusive. That's kind of how I felt listening to the song a year before it was even released. So I'm glad the song ended up being released. I believe Anki and him released it on Enhanced Records, which is a pretty big record label. So overall the song is really cool, and we'll get into the breakdown right now. So this is Anki and October Child song All or Nothing featuring Neavv. So let's get it started. All right, I just kind of want to start off the song with the sounds that I hear. So you kind of hear that guitar kind of strumming, you kind of hear a pad, but you almost hear like these water sounds in the background. And it's pretty interesting to me. That sounds like that concept I talked about in the Crab Rave song. It sounds kind of like Foley, where it's not really a synthetic sound. It sounds like an actual like recording of like a certain sound, almost like water of some sorts. But basically you can kind of hear from the very beginning it's setting up that kind of ambience, and it's just kind of setting up the tone of what the song is going to be. And just the style of October Child and Anki, they use a lot of pads, and they kind of do a lot of use a lot of ambient sounds to kind of set the tone for the song kind of in the beginning to make it more emotional in a sense. So you'll definitely hear that throughout this song going forward. So let's get back to the song right now. All right, so there was the guitar was starting to get louder. You kind of could hear the pads, and then transitioning into where the vocal was, you kind of hear a reverse kind of vocal. But before that, there's the transitionary sound into the percussion starting, and then the kind of reversed vocal part kind of plays in and introduces the vocal section. So that's definitely a cool part there. And in a lot of Anki songs, he uses guitars, and he actually does play guitar himself. So I know in a lot of, I don't know if this song in general, but I know a lot of his other songs, when he has guitar sounds in there, he actually plays the guitar, like his electric guitar, into his external sound card and records a lot of his own audio. So I know a lot of the audio when it comes to guitars in terms of Anki's style is very much using a lot of live realistic recordings of his guitars. So you kind of can hear that in the beginning of the song. So definitely something cool to note. So let's get back into the song. Alright, so you kind of hear that section where the vocal comes in. There's a really nice pairing with the guitar on the bottom, and then the rhythmic percussion. This part sounds a lot like October Child's style. If you guys haven't heard his music, in a lot of his music, like his song Skyrunner that I like, he has a lot of really rhythmic percussion, and a lot of his rhythms are really interesting to listen to. And the percussion sounds a little more acoustic almost as well when they're in his songs. So like the rhythms kind of remind me of like hip hop rhythms, kind of like more kind of intricate stuff in terms of, you know, kick, hi-hat, snare, and just the rhythm itself kind of reminds me of like old school kind of hip hop, kind of R&B kind of feel for percussion. So it's definitely really cool. And this section in terms of the rhythm kind of reminds me of his style of music, so could be his style, but that's just my food for thought on that part. So let's get back into this song. Alright, so before the build-up continues, I just want to note that with a lot of the vocals, you kind of notice there's a lot of reversed sounds going into the vocals, which is really cool. I kind of like a lot of the reverse sounds going into the vocals and kind of transitioning. It's a really nice use of that reverse reverb tail transitioning into the vocals. So that's definitely really cool. And you kind of notice the guitar sounds kind of the staple sound so far throughout the song, which is really cool. And I just forgot to mention, like in transitionary parts, there's kind of subtle white noise risers used. They're not super apparent, but they're a little more on the subtle side. And then here you're gonna kind of hear in this build-up section some toms, but we'll get a little bit more into that when the build-up section ends, and right when the drop starts. I'll talk a little bit more about that then. So let's get back into this section. Alright, so basically you kind of hear the percussion building up, you kind of hear some white noise, and it's really cool with this song. Like, the vocals don't really cut out, they're kind of just playing, like, you know how some of the other sounds are kind of, you know, has some white noise and kind of fading out. The vocals are pretty much a standard kind of sound, like the volume doesn't really change much, and the timbres don't either. And then it kind of, you know, builds up, and then there's kind of a gap of space where, like, the vocal says, like, the vocal hook and the name of the song, it says all or nothing, and then it just kind of drops. So we'll get into this drop section now, and you guys can see how cool this drop section is for the song. So let's get back into it. Alright, so in this section of the drop, you kind of hear the vocals just playing along with, you know, the kind of the plucks in the drop. And I can tell you, basically, by listening to the song and listening to both Anki and October Child, which style I can pretty much distinctly tell. So it sounds like the rhythm was created by October Child, because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of their rhythms are made in such an intricate, like, interesting way that I could tell in this drop that the percussion rhythm seems like something of their touch. And then that kind of wow, kind of wubbish sound, that kind of high-pitched wub, you hear that wub sound a lot in Anki's songs. You hear that a lot in the Circadian EP. You kind of hear that's kind of his, like, more distinct kind of sound design wub sound. So you hear that quite a bit in his own music. So you can kind of tell, like, where, you know, bits and pieces and where the influences of each other's styles are in this song. And both Anki and October Child have made songs with vocalists before, so you can kind of tell how well the vocal plays in terms of in the mix, like how well it's balanced. You can tell that both of them have experience with balancing vocals in their music. So definitely something to note. With the percussion section, there's a lot of, like, gaps before, like, the next kind of rhythmic section starts, which is a more October Child kind of rhythmic section. And overall, this is basically like the first part of the drop. It's really good, and then this part is kind of like a gap, you know, have a little bit of white noise leading into the second part of the drop. So we'll definitely, you know, hear it now as the song continues. Alright, so that's the second part of the first drop. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that I said that the sound playing the chords was the pluck. Actually, I was completely wrong. Sounds like a saw wave kind of chord progression, so kind of like super saws. that's a very common kind of sound to use for melodic dubstep and stuff like that. But the other sound I just noticed is like there's kind of like vocal kind of chops way in the background. They're lowered quite a bit. They're kind of saying like, yeah, oh yeah, like it's kind of hard to hear unless you kind of focus on listening a little bit more in depth into the song. But that's definitely something I noticed playing kind of in the background. I guess that's just a vocal chop to add some extra texture and flow into this mix, so that's definitely an interesting thing to note there. But yeah, that's the second drop. Some really interesting rhythmic sections in this second part of the drop, as well as the first part of this first drop, and overall really great. And now we're kind of getting into the break section, so there's like a nice gap kind of transitioning out from the end of the first drop into this break section, but you kind of notice the vocal still pretty prominent, so let's just kind of keep track of that throughout the song. Cool. So before the vocal comes back into this break section, you kind of have a really nice atmospheric break. You kind of have this kind of chime, kind of like bell sound playing in the background, and then you kind of have these plucks playing. So it's not really that guitar sound that you heard in the beginning of the song. These are more like I guess my equivalent would say like silent pluck sounds, almost just kind of like plucks playing the chord progression, which is really nice. They don't have a lot of like high end, so basically, the plucks are kind of muted almost, like, which is a really nice touch, because then they're not really overpowering, especially after really like fully open super saw waves in the drop section. So that's definitely really cool there. And yeah, that's pretty much all I noticed for that part of the break section, so we'll continue right now into this part of the break section.
False and giving you the answers. I'm done with late night calls. If you're lying next to someone else, meet me underneath the stars, and let's be young forever. Ripped jeans and tattooed hearts. It's now or never.
All right, what's pretty interesting there is the percussion comes in quite like the intro section, before the first drop. But I noticed in this percussion section that the kick gets a little bit fuller, I guess, halfway through. So when the kick first comes in, it's kind of a softer kick, then almost sounds like another kick is added to that kick to make it a little bit, fuller and have a little bit more impact in that section, which is pretty interesting. Adds like another layer of timbre and kind of flow into this kind of break percussion section, so that's really cool. And again, the vocals, it's a different vocal phrase in this section, which is really nice. It's not the exact same vocal phrase that you hear in the intro break section before the first drop, so it's kind of a nice switch and a nice change in vocals as well, so really cool there. So we'll continue with the song right now.
'Cause something has changed, and a change of heart. Don't wanna stay this way, don't wanna play this part. 'Cause I'm done being one of your boys, can't put out this fight. Want you to take me home, tonight is all.
All right, so this section is pretty cool. So this is kind of the build up, and you notice that there isn't really that same guitar sound playing the chords like in the intro section. It's kind of those muted plucks, which is interesting until the build up actually starts, and then you kind of have like a background kind of guitar sound, but it's not really playing the chord progression. It's kind of playing almost like a ARP almost like kind of like a mini lead building up into this break section, into this build up section, and then you kind of hear the toms coming in, kind of hear kind of a riser sound, but it's kind of cool. You know how the vocalist Nev says tonight it's all or nothing in the first part, like it's like she's saying like tonight it's all. I kind of gave an emphasis to all or nothing, and then it drops where this part she's kind of singing all or nothing a lot higher, and then has a lot of, you know, sustain kind of on the vocal itself, so it's like in a higher pitch and it sustains for a little bit longer in the second drop. So it's a change in variation between the first drop and the second drop for kind of the hook section of the vocal for the song. So it's really interesting. It's almost like how the vocalist did it in the song Brighter by Two Friends. You know how the two, I Am Lightyear and Jeff Sontag, they both had like different vocals placed in for each drop. So the first drop and second drop had like a different vocal section. This is almost kind of like how it is, except it's with the same phrase, but it's just a little bit different in how it's sung. So it's really cool. Gives like a better I guess flow, and you know, it makes it a little bit different and more unique for the vocal in each drop section. So let's get back into the song itself and let's listen to the second drop. All right, so again, like this part of in the first section of the drop, it's pretty similar. The one thing I just kind of like to note is the beginning section. Right after the build up in the beginning of the drop, like kind of the percussion goes, the like tonight all or nothing, and then the vocalist is nothing, and then the percussion goes dun, 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 and it almost sounds like it's glitching, and the percussion goes along with the synths like that with the saw waves, which is really cool. A really nice touch in the beginning part of that section, which is a little bit different than the drop section in the first part of the first drop. So definitely something I want to note there, but otherwise, you know, the vocal spacing and everything else is pretty much the same. So let's just continue with this drop. Alright, so that second part of the second drop, pretty similar to the second part of the first drop. I just want to note how the transition into the outro was. There wasn't actually any percussion kind of leading in or like an ending kick. It kind of just, the percussion just stopped and then kind of just transitioned right into the outro, but it was so smooth in how it transitioned. We kind of have the guitar sound coming back in. Just to kind of outro the song, which is a sound you didn't really hear since like the beginning of the song, where it's like in the intro and the first break section, you kind of hear that guitar sound, but this guitar sound now is a little more muted, so just kind of a signal and subtle way to show that the song is, you know, outroing out. So we'll listen to the outro and then we'll go from there. All right, so that outro is really cool. So you hear kind of the piano playing, and then you hear the guitars playing for a little while with the pad, and then after a while that kind of fades out and you just kind of hear the piano play, kind of the lead section. And basically, to me, that reminds me a lot of Porter Robinson's older style, where he had the piano kind of play out. And I know October Child, he has heavy influence from Porter Robinson, so I can kind of see how that was his idea of how to outro the song, because it has like a huge kind of Porter Robinson kind of influence on that outro, with just like the piano playing the lead, kind of being the main focus of the outro, and just ending the song with the piano playing the lead section. So definitely could see that. And overall, this is Anki's song All or Nothing with October Child featuring Neavv, and you can pretty much tell Anki's style and October Child's style if you've listened to both of their music and at all, or in the past, or maybe in the future you will be able to tell. But just for what I can tell, Anki's contribution was the guitar section, the balancing of the vocals, and then in the drop section, the kind of saw wave chords, and then that like really crazy sounding wub, kind of higher pitch sounding wub. And then for October Child, his influence was also balancing the vocal, but a lot of the rhythmic percussion, kind of the atmosphere overall of the song, kind of some of the vocal chop-ish and, you know, reverse vocals in the section. A lot of the rhythmic percussion, definitely October Child's influence, and the outro section with the piano and just how that was structured. So overall, this is their collab. This is a insanely good song. There's not much I can say other than this song is fantastic. Every time I listen to this song, like, I feel the emotions and the feels, and it just kind of reminds me of the time when October Child shared this song with me, way back, I want to say in like at least 2016 or 2017, when I felt exclusive listening to the song before it even came out. So definitely was really cool there. And I don't know, the song just reminds me of a certain time of, you know, listening to music back then. So overall, that is All or Nothing. And if you guys like this video, leave a comment whether you like it or not. And otherwise, that's about it. And I hope you guys have a good one. Peace.